Welcome, everybody. This is the meeting of the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. It is December 16th, 2021. So welcome. I'm Tiffany Edwards, the chair, and I think we'll just get started. Excuse me, apologize. I have a little tea in my throat. First item on the agenda, I'm just going to we're meeting by Zoom, virtually. We've been doing this for the pandemic. Oh, closed captions. Do we have that available? It looks like it's been enabled. Is that right? Okay. Closed captions have been enabled. Meeting virtually during the pandemic. And so I think you're all pretty familiar, but if you can raise your hand, I can see this. I can also see the raise hand feature. If you use that down at the bottom there, that's helps me see who's raised their hand and in what order. So anybody have, I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda. I just want to give anybody the opportunity to bring up any issues that they may have with what we're going to be reviewing tonight. None, then I would then ask for approval. I would take a motion on the approval of the December 2nd Zoom meeting summary. If anybody can.
I'll move.
I'll second it.
Moved by Kevin, second by Howard. Any discussion? All right, I'll just ask for all those in favor of supporting the minutes. Go ahead and raise your hand. All right, any opposed?
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't here.
Yep, that was what I was going to ask for, Jennifer. Any abstentions? We have Jennifer yay, so that's great. No problem. Any other abstentions? So just Jennifer. Okay, perfect. At this time, I will ask if there is any public comment. I don't know if we have any participants. It looked like we might, but Elena, you probably okay.
We do have a participant, and I can see their name now.
Okay, so at this time, if there are any of the members of the public who wish to address this committee, we would go ahead and open it up for public comment. Happy to welcome that. And I would just say, if you're able to, just go ahead and do the raise your hand, use the raise your hand. But if not, then
it looks like they just dropped off. So I guess they did not want to speak.
They didn't want to comment. They didn't want to fly under the radar. So, okay, well, we don't have any public comment. I will at this time, I'm going to actually, I think I'm going to be turning it over to Ed McMahon, who has a brief announcement. So Ed, is that okay? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I appreciate taking a short amount of time here. Just wanted to announce to all the members that I'm retiring from the HBA here in a couple of weeks, December 31st. I'm happy to announce that I'm very pleased with who's going to be replacing me. The HBA's in great hands. I've been working with the new EO for a couple of weeks, and Betsy Swartz will be taking over the government affairs activity for the HBA. I strongly believe that we should be represented on the EETAC, and processes are being done right now to hopefully have Betsy Swartz replace me on the EETAC. With that said, don't be a bit surprised if you don't see me as an attendee in future meetings after the end of the year. Have so much respect for all of you and learned so much. That includes staff when I'm talking about respect, by the way. And I've learned a lot and have really enjoyed working with everyone, and I'll watch the work progress. That's it. And thank you for the time, Tiffany.
Oh, absolutely, Ed. It is my pleasure. And I see Sue's hand is raised, so I'll go ahead and let her speak first. Sue.
So we are losing an institution. And no, I'm serious about that. Ed's knowledge of all of this information exceeds any of the rest of us, I think. And I have so appreciated his dignity and grace in the face of a lot of topics that are kind of contentious and potentially difficult to talk about. I can't believe you're retiring and I am so sad. Okay, I'm actually happy for you, but I am sad because we really are losing an institution, and I hope you'll stay involved in some way, Ed. There are very few people who can carry that flag as graciously as Ed has carried it over all these years.
Wow, thank you so much, Sue. Appreciate that. Means a lot.
Heather, I'm gonna call on you, and then John, you can go ahead and follow Heather. There
I
you go.
couldn't have said it, and I was muted, so I couldn't have said it anyway, but I couldn't have said it any better than Sue. So I just, that staff feels exactly the same way. We really appreciate all of your time. It's been literally years of your time. And you know, we couldn't have gotten this far without you, Ed. And I just have very much appreciated the working relationship, the lens that you bring, the questions you ask, the clarifications, all of it. I mean, your participation has been huge. So thank you so much. I want to we can talk about replacement later. I think this space right now should be about thanking you, because we won't be holding another meeting before the end of the year. So thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry to see you go, Ed. You bring such a valuable voice to this committee. And I think one of the things that I will be always remember is how that even going back to the TAC, you know, when before it was the EETAC, it was just the Technical Advisory Committee. And, you know, there's different camps, right? So there's the home builders, and then there's 1,000 Friends, and there's, you know, the development committee community and all these other things. And the fact that you representing the Home Builders Association basically partnered up with 1,000 Friends to help shepherd Envision Eugene across the finish line, I think is a testament to our community, one, as a whole, and two, your leadership to be able to bring your members to that place. You know, I think you understood that we needed to get to that place, but being able to bring the membership that you represent to that place is a really big accomplishment. And I thank you for doing that.
Right.
Before we move on, just one quick comment, because I do believe it's a good time for me to leave because of the system that we've set up that all of you are a part of. We are now going to be able to give the council the prudent information so they can make the right decision. The work is done, and I feel pleased to have been a part of it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm gonna just take the opportunity very briefly, because I have thoroughly enjoyed working with you very closely on a number of things, and not just in this group, but you and I have worked on a lot of stuff, and I've always been very impressed. You have incredible amount of integrity and professionalism, and like John said, you're able to kind of herd cats when it comes to your members, and that is not an easy task. And so I really, really appreciate it personally. So I'm going to very much miss you and your expertise, but I really hope that I will still get to see you now and again, out and about or whatever. So maybe we'll have to make it intentional, but please don't be a stranger. So, okay, well, now that we've got the sad part taken care of, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe the sad part's actually coming, but I'm kidding. I think we're ready to kind of continue on with the work that we've been doing. We've got a schedule in front of us, and Heather and Elena are just going to continue to take us through these pieces. So Hopefully everyone's kind of had a chance to go through them. I've sort of made notes, but I always find this process really helpful because you all thinking through and helping me think about things in maybe a different way than I saw them. I really appreciate the process that we go through, and I know that we'll get a lot out of this. So I think we're still in jobs. Is that right, Heather and Elena? And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys to navigate us through the process.
Yeah, so we were very briefly touched on some of the census information related to jobs, kind of in this last group. But we just kind of wanted to wrap up and see if anyone had anything to say. So this had information about average annual wage, and then sort of educational attainment for the population 25 and older, commuting patterns, things like that. Don't know if anyone has any questions or notes on this section.
Sorry, I'm muted. I said I'm looking for hands. I don't see any on this job section. To be honest, I kind of thought we were pretty close to the end. Oh, Dennis.
Yeah.
Oh, Dennis has got to.
I just want to follow up a couple of things that I got from listening to the recording of the last meeting and that are still not clear to me and are probably worth trying to figure out how to watch. And that's both some of the issues about gig workers that are not readily countable. And, just begin to continue that process of how might we develop some metrics around those hard to identify, self-employed contractor kind of people. And another piece that came up as a brief question in a recent council work session I sat in on, and it's maybe related more to the discussion about employment related development, is looking at places where jobs may be lost and particularly locations for jobs as we move towards more virtual employment. Concerns that I'm beginning to hear about, loss of office space in downtown, which certainly has implications in terms of land in the inventory that may be convertible and all those kinds of issues. So I just want to make sure they're in the mix. Having talked to staff before, I imagine you're thinking about it, but just kind of want to put it out there as something that has been given voice. Those kinds of issues about it's such a dramatically changing job environment. Gig work and distance employment and all of that. So those are the comments I just wanted to share.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that is definitely something that we're thinking about, and it kind of probably does fall mostly into employment development. I will say the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis sent out an email today that was reviewing national and Oregon and metro area data in Oregon, looking at the remote workers and sort of the trends there and how many people have gone back to work since so many people worked from home in 2020. So I think, yeah, we are thinking about that and probably will use some of that information and can incorporate some of that into the report.
Yeah, Elena, thanks. I just want to mention, because I was actually thinking about that and thinking about how that shift in the workplace could potentially change the housing needs. And so what we've identified that we need probably never factored in the fact that people may need home offices and, actual legit workspaces that change their living situation as we know it. And so I think that just looking at what the future housing mix and the future, what we see trends, and just maybe just incorporate a caveat into our report that just, obviously the pandemic has changed a lot and we do address it here. I think one of the things that we will have to continue to we talk about it here with the different scenarios, but I think specifically how that might shift what people need in the way of housing, if that makes sense. So anyhow, I just kind of wanted to mention that, but thank you. That was really helpful, Dennis.
If I can respond to
Kevin.
that really quick.
Yeah, and Kevin has his
before-
hand up, so I'll let you go and then Kevin.
We do have a section in the report about the pandemic, and that a lot of our jobs data, especially for Eugene, is before the pandemic. That's the nice thing when we get to the UGB analysis, that we'll have refreshed data, we'll have new data. I think that's nice, although it's going to be tricky, right? Because it is probably going to look different than previous years. But the caveat is really more about jobs in the report. And so I think that it sounds like what we could do is we could add some more information about how it's not just jobs that are affected by the pandemic, but also and changing work environments, but housing needs may be changing too. So we can just flag that because I think if I remember correctly, the report is more heavy on the pandemic's relation to population and to jobs, but not really that housing. So we'll add that flag.
Hey, Kevin, go for it.
So thank you, Dennis, for bringing that up. I think we're missing the point that I think he made about gig workers being potentially not counted in, because they're by definition almost informal workers, and they're not reporting through the normal channels that would get accounted for by the state. And so this isn't, we're not, I don't think he's referring to remote workers. These are gig workers whose sole source of income are piecemeal jobs, doing a piece of graphics or delivery work or whatever, that doesn't get, because they don't have health insurance, they don't have any of the benefits, any of the triggers for being measured.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last time. So it is kind of two issues. Last time we talked about whether or not the payroll tax would be helpful in figuring out what the total employment is. There are other things we can look at too, because we actually get total employment for Lane County. It's Eugene that we have a harder time getting that data for. So what I think we wrote down from the last meeting was that we need to flag this as an issue, and that we should try to find more sources or analysis that we can bring to the table for the UGB analysis to get a better sense of non-covered, insurance and covered employees, I think is what they are. That's what gets reported to the state. Yeah, but yeah, two issues, it sounds like.
And Dennis, do you have your hand up for a second time, or is that just an old?
No, I did put it back up.
Okay, go for it.
Just want to confirm that, yeah, I was talking about both the issues impacting remote workers. And I did notice at the last meeting when I listened to the tape, you kind of were coming up with almost a label about what I, in my notes, called emerging questions or continuing issues, and that you might flag kind of a list or a category of those. And so I think it's consistent with what I heard, but to include those impact on employment, which we'll get to more later in the discussion, particularly office space utilization around remote workers, but also the employment data related to gig workers who are hard to track.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, we have started that list. There's no other questions on this sort of small job section, then we can move forward. All right.
Okay, so I'm gonna walk through the housing development metrics. Is the size, I should have asked this, is the size what you're seeing, is the text readable? Are you all able to follow along with the screen share? Okay. Sometimes it can be too big too, so yeah, let me know. So every time we start a new section, there are these general questions in the report, high level. Just wanted to make sure there weren't any key questions that folks felt like we're missing from this section. For those of you that weren't in the meetings before or may have missed this, these questions are pretty much the questions that we have to use to do the UGB analysis.
Okay, so I'll let you, I have a comment, but I'm gonna call on John, followed by Kevin, and then I'll put myself in the queue. There. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. So as far as key questions, one of the things that jumped out to me, and this would have to, I hope this will be considered when we're looking at a UGB expansion, was if we go down to the next page, page 35, it talks about an underproduction or shortage of about 8,200 dwellings right there. And I don't know if that was counted in when we did the UGB analysis the first time, but to me, that would be a key question for anything moving forward. Because if we're looking at what is our housing need, and we know that there's a deficit of 8,200 that didn't get, okay, Heather's shaking her head. So just answer that question, whether or not we need to have that number put in someplace so that that's our base starting point.
Right, so thank you for bringing that up. So it's a little bit tricky because this is from a draft regional housing needs analysis methodology. So it's not an adopted regional housing needs analysis, but it was the new House Bill 2003 statutes or rules required the state to see if they could develop a regional housing needs analysis. So it's basically what they did is they worked with consultants to figure out what the total housing need was for the state, and then parsed it down to county level and then parsed it down to city level. And they focused not just, there were 3 buckets that they looked at, not just how much new housing is needed based on your population growth. That's one bucket. And that's what we're currently required to do for UGB analysis, is just that one bucket. The second bucket, or maybe not necessarily in this order, but the second bucket, one of the other buckets, was looking at underproduction and trying to come up with an estimate of whether or not the city already had an underproduction, a deficit of housing based on existing conditions. So they already didn't have enough, whereas the UGB analysis is just looking at planning for new growth. It's not planning for if you've already got a deficit. And then the third bucket is planning for folks that are experiencing homelessness. And so the state required the state itself to come up with a methodology, and that's what this regional housing needs analysis is a draft methodology trying to get at those 3 buckets. And it's not adopted. We have been not with the UGB analysis requirements do not require us to use that. And on the same, and so it's a little bit tricky including it in here because growth monitoring is the foundation of it, is looking at what we need for our UGB analysis. But we do feel like it's informative to know that there is this draft methodology out there that identified that much of an existing deficit of housing in Eugene already. And so it can help inform policy decisions. So not right now, because we're not making those now, but to help, if people are concerned about, whether or not, I guess it broadens the discussion a little bit, because sometimes we look at UG, we're planning for 15,000 homes. Well, maybe not. I mean, we're required to plan for 15,000 more homes, but we also have this additional information. So if we do better in our efficiency measures than we were expecting to do, isn't that a good thing in the context of knowing that we've got this other information out here about a deficit?
So I've got a question about that.
Yeah.
So you say we don't have to put it into our UGB analysis. Are we allowed to put it into our UGB analysis?
Not right now.
So
But I think the state is working on, they're still looking at and working on the implications of the regional housing needs analysis and how or whether to fit it into the UGB planning process.
So what you're saying is that if and when we decide to do a UGB analysis, we cannot consider that we have a deficit of 8,200 people. We can only build to what we think is going to be our population increase by state statute.
So
That's ridiculous.
right now, I mean, we have to comply with whatever the OARs are at the time we do our UGB analysis. And so I guess that's what I'm saying, is that my understanding is that they are still studying how or what parts of the regional housing needs analysis to require jurisdictions to use. So at this point, we're still waiting for more direction. I believe the regional housing needs assessment work was presented to the state earlier this year. So I think that there's just more work being done on it. But we could put a flag. I mean, that could be another one of those emerging issues flags that we could put in there. We did also cite to this number in the housing implementation plan that council is reviewing. We've made that connection there as well. And the housing implementation plan is not in the same box that the UGB analysis is. We can really just plan for housing. And so it's a really good fit for that work. It's not as good for the UGB analysis. It provides context, but it's not a requirement yet.
Kevin, why don't you go ahead? I took my hand down. I'm gonna wait for my comments because I think it's a
I
different.
have kind of a comment and I have a question. And my comment is sort of a terminology thing. We use the term home, houses, units, and dwellings. And is the intention just to create variety, or are there, are there different meanings to those things? Because, are new homes keeping up with population growth? I'm not sure, but I suspect maybe the average reader would equate home potentially to a single family house or a separate structure, because right next to it, you have a thing, number of new housing units by structure type, as if a unit is different from a home. And then down below, I think there's use the term dwelling. So I just wanted to point out that for readers, average readers, and city council members maybe fall into that camp. They've got a lot of issues on their plate. That maybe we ought to be a little more careful with the words that we use there. My question is, relates to ownership. Or do we track somewhere dwelling ownership? Because it's a huge equity issue, you know, that's emerging with talking about affordable housing and equity, and the path to wealth generation through ownership of your dwelling. And we, you know, make it really difficult for too largest segment of our population. And that may not be what our task is right here, but I'd at least like to flag it as something worth tracking in the future.
Yeah, so we talk about, we have census data, dwelling units, housing units, you're right, I say it interchangeably, and we will clean this up, I think, because our charts refer to dwellings. I think we'll probably use housing and dwellings. Those will probably be our two, and try to get rid of homes. And I thought we had replaced units. A lot of people say dwelling units. I thought we had replaced units with dwellings, but it wouldn't surprise me if we had some sneakers in there. So we will do those two things. That's great feedback. So in our census data, and I can find that if we need to, but we do have dwellings by tenure, so by renter or ownership. And when we get to the UGB analysis, we'll try to do some more of that cross-pollination of the census data, where we can break down those things by income as well. So a little bit more of that. Right now for monitoring, we're not doing as much of the analysis of the census data, but just census points.
So it's not something we can track through the planning and permitting process.
We do not, yeah, we don't get that information, even with sometimes things like will come in looking like apartments and then they'll get condoized. So then they're single family attached, and that can happen at any time. It can happen after it's already built or before, or yeah, so we don't get tenure information at building permit.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna actually interject right here because I think my note, it probably does make sense. Part of my comments. So in reading through, you know, just to add more complication here, you know, the dwellings by housing mix, the single family detached, single family attached. So in the process that we're going through at Planning Commission right now on House Bill 2001, we're renaming all of that. And so when you guys come to Planning Commission, as well as then when we go to council, I want to flag for consistency. And so whether Lauren or, somebody needs to just kind of scrub through the language just to make sure that, I recognize that that's what we've been calling things all along. And so that's how we've captured things. But as we're starting to remove the word detached from single unit, that's what we're calling them, single unit, and then single unit attached, because detached to what? Like, it's a standalone home. So we like, those are some of the language changes that are happening. And so I think that even if we were to acknowledge that that's the same thing we're talking about, because I don't want people to get confused when we go then to these other processes and go like, wait a minute, which one are we talking about? And multifamily, multi-unit, that's what we're getting rid of the word family. We're calling them single unit, multi-unit, so things like that. So I just want to flag that, because I think that if we can make the language consistent in the process, just because the timing is really, it's within a few months, if that. So I think that it would be helpful just to try to think through how we want to present that.
Yeah, I think we will have to talk about it, because it's not as easy as just changing the words in the report. These charts are all in a software system that we're trying to do a bunch of edits too. And I think we talked about this early on. I think you and John Borofsky both brought this up. And so, you know, I just have to beg patience with this because I don't know whether it's doing a table that says, you know, this report is based on how we did it in the UGB analysis. We understand that these terms are fluid right now. They're changing. Nothing's adopted yet. That's the other thing. So that, so we just can't. Yeah. So anyway, maybe it's a table or something like that, but yeah, we hear you guys. We're absolutely going to have to address it. And I'm not sure yet what we're going to do, but.
Yeah, because like even the paragraph here that talks about the housing mix, you've got single family detached, and multifamily. And multifamily includes duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And we don't consider that multifamily. We consider that middle housing. And so even to just kind of provide a caveat that helps to talk about the fact that these are evolving terms. And so maybe, you know, maybe it's that, I don't know. I just don't want to confuse people or have people feel like more likely what it would come across as is the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. And I don't want that to be the perception by either of these, you know, policy bodies that they're like, don't they all work together? How did they not get the memo? We're calling it something different now. So anyway, that's just that was my main topic or my main.
Yeah, and it's not adopted yet. So
Right.
like, I mean, that's the other thing is that you know, that's the challenge is that it's not adopted yet. You guys are in the thick of it. The community's in the thick of it. And once we make those changes, we will change them. But you know, one of the challenges is if we made those changes now and then it changes again, it's like, then what we have in here doesn't match anything. And so it is very, I know, it's a bit messy.
It's messy. Okay. Well, I just wanted to put that out there because that was my initial gut reaction when I read through it. It was like, oh, we're not saying these words anymore, or at least anyway. Okay. That's all I got. So I don't see any other hands. And if we want to keep moving on, then let's do it.
Sure. Okay, great. So maybe we will keep dwellings, maybe we'll keep units. I don't know. So maybe we'll say dwelling units. That could be, maybe we'll just combine them. So as you know, I think the key parts of the general housing development that's happened that we wanted to emphasize or call out, I guess, is the amount of housing that we've reached. So we've reached about 50% of our projected need. But then most of that has been, or a large portion of it has been, 72% has been multifamily housing. And then within that, the majority of it has been 5 unit types, 5 or more units, structure types. So I think this chart does that really well. We also have the growth rates, because seemed like another good high level way to talk about housing production that we've seen compared to population growth. Yeah, so I just want to kind of stop there because that's the first section. Are there any concerns or things from the appendices related to general housing that folks feel like should be elevated into this section, or does this seem reasonable?
I have a question on something here that I underlined, and it's more about, so there's a sentence here. It says the single family housing pace is well below expected. Now, is that based on a need for, so this is where I'm getting kind of confused with what, obviously these are projections that are built in. So this is when you incorporate, when you throw middle housing into the mix, it's defined differently. But so for example, you know, a duplex is being categorized as a multifamily housing, but for the purposes of what a, you know, a household of two would need, is it, I'm not sure how I'm trying to say this, but I guess I'm trying to say that we've been operating under the assumption that single family homes house everybody, and then the multifamily is the more denser housing. And so I guess I don't know really what my question is. It's not very succinct in my brain, but I guess I'm just trying to get at, is it actually single family houses that is below pace based on the need, or is it actually structures that house, we're talking about a family of four. We're low on inventory for someone who is like a family of four, or we're low on inventory for single family houses.
It's
or
single family
family
houses. It's single
unit.
family houses. So what's within this, and we talked a little bit about that in the appendix, is, let's see, let's just go to that. What's in the different bins of housing types?
Yes.
Because single family detached is, hold please.
Maybe a better way for me to ask my question is, or we're assuming that single family detached is what is needed to house you know,
It's
my husband and I, whereas actually a middle housing unit could be sufficient for something
So-
like that.
Yeah, so it's so single family detached, the category is your typical single family detached, accessory dwellings, manufactured homes. Those are the three things that the three structure types that are within that category. And the way that the forecast, where it comes from, your housing need comes from, is looking at your at this point, the way the OARs, and when we did the analysis, the way they work is that you take your population projection and you figure out how many people that is growth, and then figure out how many total dwellings. So that's, for us, it's 15,100 for the next 20 years of new dwellings. And then you look at what percentage your historically, so for us, it was the previous 12 years, what percentage had been single family at that time. That's how it was broken up. Single family detached, 2 to 4 units. Single family detached, single family attached, row houses and condos, 2 to 4 units, and then 5+ units. Those are the bins that we used in the UGB analysis. And so you figure out your historical trends, and then you figure out if with your historical trends, if you have been, I'm totally oversimplifying here, but if your housing has been meeting your needs for income as well as households, but there isn't a great way to match income with housing types. And so generally what ends up happening if you're not meeting your income needs on, moderate to lower incomes, then the state looks at you to increase your production of multifamily housing in that bin, so like attached housing. And so that's why, if you look at what our housing mix has been for the whole city, and then you look at what we're planning for the housing mix of just new units, it's shifted to planning for more multifamily housing because we've had an affordability issue.
Right.
So that's kind of how it works. It's
Okay.
kind of like projecting what your proportions that you've seen before going forward. So
Okay, I get it. And I'll just say, I think that how I might simplify my question is that traditionally we think we need single family homes for 2 people because that's all we've ever built. So, I mean, that's generally what we've built. We haven't built other types of units. And so when we are showing that we are deficient by X amount of single family homes, it really doesn't necessarily be that all of those households require a single family house. They just think that's what they need because that's all we built. And unless you're going to live in an apartment or a duplex, oh, well, then you need a single family home. And so I guess I just want to put that out there that we're trying to think about things a little bit differently, and certainly have our policymakers be thinking outside the box a little bit more and saying like, yeah, my husband and I moved to Eugene and we're looking for housing, doesn't mean we need a single family home. We could easily live in a townhouse or something else like that. But you know, if you were to capture that data, you would think, okay, you guys we need a unit of single family housing unit, which may or may not be anyway.
Yeah, so this is just
I'm babbling at this point.
No, I mean, it's tough because you guys are in the conversations about changing the way we're talking about things and what we're planning for, and the monitoring report is not there. We are not at changing how we plan for things in the monitoring report. But I think that this is another emerging issue that we should flag, is that, you know, the structure types, the names of things, and how we've planned for housing is changing. And the monitoring report does not reflect that.
Okay, I promise I'll stop.
No, this is good. I mean, these are
Dennis.
good things we need to flag. Yeah.
I'm gonna and because it's gonna come, I'm like, if you were to present this today in Planning Commission, this is the conversation that they would be having. And so I want to flag it so that we know how to address it when those questions come up. Okay, Dennis and then John.
Yeah, this is related to some of the questions I had looking at some of the interrelationship between population and units. On the one hand, we're talking about dwellings, and on the other hand, we're talking about potential dwellers. And I think partially what I hear you saying, Tiffany, we don't know how many people are going to occupy that unit that's called a single family. Isn't it a family of my friend who just retired and moved to Eugene and bought what would be classified as a single family home, and only one person's going to live there. And that same household may have housed 5 people, you know, before it was sold to her as the new buyer. And so we're going to end up with some difficulty when we're trying to compare population to units to house a population, because it's such a variable in the number of dwellers. Am I understanding, Heather, though, that you're looking at past proportions to give some indication of what the need would be by population? And if so, how can we, and that maybe it's in that emerging issues, look at issues about potential change in housing numbers of dwellers per house? For example, in an aging population, we're likely to have fewer people per unit, because there will be more people like my retiree friend who occupy a whole dwelling as a single individual. And I know there's other demographic data that tends to be smaller family size. And I don't know if there's any way to track that, or if that's just the issues of things that may be changing that are part of the nature of who, not merely how many.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And so when we do translate the number of dwelling units that we're planning for, the new ones, we take the population growth and then we divide that by an average number of people per household from the census data. And then we do some other math that gets you your total units that you're planning for, including how we deal with group quarters. So nursing homes, dormitories, how we plan for those, and then also making sure that we increase the amount of housing units that we're planning for, new housing units, by a certain percentage to allow for some vacancy within the whole housing stock. So that there's movement, not that we're planning for new vacant houses, but more that we're planning for our housing stock, our total housing stock, to allow movement within it. So, so we do use an average number of people per household from the census data. When we did the UGB analysis before, we were able to do some analysis. Echo Northwest did some analysis around demographics and housing, and their housing patterns, for lack of a better term. And so we were able to look at things like age, income, race and ethnicity, things like that. And so that's what I was talking about earlier, that kind of cross-pollination of the census data that we're not really doing in monitoring, because we're just monitoring, we're just picking data points and comparing the two. But additional analysis, hopefully we will be able to do. You know, there are questions about the decennial census and the quality of it. And so those are things we're going to have to look at and see if there's other sources as well to help inform this when we do the UGB analysis.
Dawn, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
So for me, this section here and the one that we're moving into next are going to be the ones that are going to be looked at. This is my opinion, looked at most deeply by the policymakers. And the reason I say that was because these are two of the biggest decisions that they debated when they enacted the UGB back, our first UGB analysis. And that was the housing mix. What is our housing mix going to be? And they looked at the historicals, and it was 56 to 43. And they came down with 55-45. Well, there was contention on council. Is that the right number? And the answer was, we'll find that out in monitoring. And that, I mean, Heather probably said that 20 times, and Terry and everybody else, we'll find that out in monitoring. Well, this is it. This is where we find it out. And there are caveats because of the student housing that was overbuilt or built to a higher percentage than normal. But we're at 72% multifamily, 5+ units. And then when you go down into the next section, you'll see that used a lot less land because they were doing it on commercial zoned property, which we didn't think it was going to happen. We didn't think they were going to tear down Cafe Yum and put 280 units on, right? And so this is what monitoring is about. We're not looking at what we think is going to happen in the future. It will help us to inform that, but this is a snapshot and saying, how did we get it right or did we get it wrong? And I think this is one of the areas where it's going to be looked at by the policymakers. Some of them are going to say, we got it wrong. And then there is the caveat of the student housing. For me, however, I do believe that the area that is going to be developed is going to be, it seems to me that the redeveloping commercial property is a financially feasible way to achieve housing in our community. And so I think when we get down to the next section, that'll be something I'll talk to. But I just want to make sure that this section is clear. And if there's anything that we really feel we need to highlight to our policymakers, this is the section that it's going to be very important to do that.
Can I tack on to what John just said? And I'm looking for this sentence in here, and I apologize because I highlighted it and now I don't know what it is, but you guys will remember. It said that where the need is at the both ends of the housing spectrum. It's the young people and it's the old people. And so I wrote a note here because I was like, well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean small households? Because that's what is unique to those bookended components of the population, small households and lower income or fixed incomes. So those to me are the two qualifying criteria. And in this report, that was what was identified as where we're going to have the greatest need, is at either opposite ends of the spectrum. That does not align with a higher need for single family dwellings. That is generally that's a higher need for smaller, more affordable units, which is actually the opposite of single family dwellings. And so that's why I had written that there was some inconsistencies in general in that as a finding, but that also it didn't seem to align with this need for us being behind with single family dwellings. So I'm going to try to find it because I wrote notes next to it and my notes might make more sense than what I'm trying to explain right now. Sue, why don't you go? Oh, go ahead, Heather.
I just wanted to, is it okay, Sue, if I respond
Yes.
on that? Okay. So I think it was in the beginning and it was actually talking about the population forecast. And so this information, everything in this monitoring report, unless we're talking about a new forecast, is all about our adopted 2012 to 2032 forecast. And so I think what that was in relation to was saying there's a new PSU population forecast, and it's saying that, and I think you pointed this out last time, Tiffany, that it's saying that our 80 and older age group is going to double to 8% of our population, and that our, I think it's 20 to 24 ages are still going to maintain to be the largest portion or one of the largest portions of our population in the new forecast. And so this is what our old forecast and our old UGB analysis said we needed. What we were trying to flag is that there's a new forecast, and the at least from an age categories perspective, the new forecast may warrant looking at different housing types than what we're currently planning for. So if that's not clear, I mean, it sounds like it's not clear. So I think that that's something we can work on in the report, but I want to make sure that everybody, that is a little bit of a challenge, is that most all of these charts are related to an existing older adopted forecast. And since then we've gotten new forecasts, and we haven't changed what we need based on those new forecasts, but we do need to track those new forecasts and see how they're different.
Okay.
So.
Sue, please, by all means, I apologize.
Right. Okay. So Tiffany, I saw the same sentence that you did. And to me, the answer is it's about affordability. It's not about housing type. It's just about affordability. That's my answer to the question.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the comment that I wrote was, well, what is unique about if moving forward, we're projecting that we're going to need, we know that our 80 plus is going to grow in the numbers. They're going to become 8% of our population instead of currently 4%. Students will be relatively the same, but the housing needs will be growing at these two ends. But what does that look like? And I think, Sue, you hit it. It's actually, we need units that are more affordable. So whether it's a single family home or an apartment or whatever else it is, if we are looking at the population that we need to house, aside from the fact that those tend to be smaller households, I mean, it's going to be 1 or 2 people at that point. We're not necessarily, you're not talking about a family of 4. If you're seniors on a fixed income, you probably don't live in a family of 4. Maybe that, but that's probably really uncommon. And so I think you're right. I think it correlates more to an affordability component than it does the actual housing type necessarily. Anyway, I have a lot of random notes and they're kind of all throughout here. So I apologize. I just sort of read and wrote notes and now I can't find where they all are, but I'll let us move on.
So this is great conversation. I think if there are things, I just want to make sure that if there are things that folks feel are not being hit hard enough or called out specifically enough, and we'll come back to the executive summary at the end. So maybe that's a place where, you know, we're taking notes, and our plan, which I haven't really talked to you about, I guess, is that we're taking notes, we're keeping a track changes version, and we're keep putting comments in about where we got feedback that we want to make sure we address. And so ideally, we would come back to you with a revised document that you can see those changes in it. And so I think I just want to make sure you know that in a way, we're kind of being a little bit open-ended about some of these things. We've flagged some issues, and so we'll regroup when we get through all of this, try to address concerns or questions where needed, make sure it's called out, and then we'll take a final feedback comments, I guess, at the end of this. Hopefully that works. I'm trying, you know, I don't want to like keep rehashing the same thing over and over again, but I also want to make sure that we're getting everybody's feedback and you guys know how we're responding to it. So I think I'm going to move on. We have talked about housing mix. I paused on this for just a second while John was talking. This is our chart that we thought was good to pull forward that shows, remember how I was talking about that our mix, you know, there's a bunch of data, historical data we look at to figure out what housing mix of structure types to plan for going forward. This was the 12-year data, the mix, and then what we are planning for is here, and then what we've been seeing is here, and then this is the projected trend. So this seemed, to your point, John, about this being the kind of focal point of decision maker conversation. This seemed like a good one to pull forward. And then we have it broken down a little bit more so that you've got single family detached, single family attached, and then multifamily. It's not just multifamily, but it's the 2 to 4 units and the 5+. So it really kind of hammers home, you know, what we were planning for is 25% 5+ dwellings, and what we've been seeing is 67%. Yes, student-oriented numbers. So it's actually about 35%. I told you all that I was going to double check that. It's about 35%, not 30. So it was up. We were counting the project, but not all the units in the project. So we were missing some. It's about 1,928, I think is the number that I came up with. We are talking here about those structure types again. And I think we, I'm not sure if there's anything else we want to say, if there's any concerns or anything else we want to say about housing mix or the amount of, I know there was one comment that I think a couple folks, it might've been Mark Reed as well as Phil, who's not here, but we made a comment early in the report, and then I think we might be doing it a little bit here, where we said that the way we phrased it was that because 5 or more the demand for 5 or more units has been so high, the demand for 2 to 4 units has been really low. And that's not necessarily the way we want to say that. The demand for 5 or more units, a lot of that has been around the university and related to student housing. And the demand for 2 to 4 units, or what has been built for 2 to 4 units, has been a lot lower than anticipated. It's not necessarily that one is driving the other. So we are planning on rephrasing that and trying to catch that everywhere.
Evan, go ahead.
Would it be good maybe to add just a comment there about House Bill 2001 and the unknown as to whether that's going to encourage a lot of the 2 to 4 dwelling structures? Yet to be seen, but since you're making these kind of projective comments, it might be good to just recognize that that may be a potential sea change.
Yeah, so we have this here. On the other hand, removing barriers to middle housing may increase these housing types over time. We could say removing barriers to middle housing as part of implementation of House Bill 2001, so it catches somebody's eye a little bit better. Okay, sounds good. But that's what we were trying to get out there.
So for me, one of the big takeaways in this last article, second to last paragraph, is the 41% more than anticipated on 5+. Again, that's driven by student housing, but I also feel that may be something, again, going forward as to the economics of building large apartments. If it's making sense now for students, pretty soon it's going to make sense for market rate housing as well. So that just jumps out. And then there's one thing that I want to address to, Tiffany, you said that, the 80-year-olds are going to live in, 2 people in a house. Well, there's different demographics that live multi-generational, and those are starting to grow as well. So just saying that when you're 80 years old, it's going to be you and your husband doesn't necessarily translate to different cultures and different demographics. A lot of them keep the grandparents in the house.
Yeah, John, I agree. And I'm wondering if that's reflected in any of this, because that's because I'm all about the data. And so do we know that households, I know there's data that talks about how, we have a majority of households of 2, and yet we have housing that can accommodate, 6 people. And so that was sort of the mismatch that I was kind of talking about. So I agree with you. Absolutely. There are, and we've also had regulations that have limited the number of unrelated people that have been able to occupy the same dwelling and things like that. And so I do absolutely recognize that. So I apologize if I was generalizing, but I would, based on data of just the composition of households throughout the community, I think that's where my question about, well, is single family housing really what is being assumed is the need that matches, the vast majority of our households? Because I don't know. Anyway. Anyone else have any questions or comments? I just flagged this on a sub question underneath this right here. You've got it up right now. How many new accessory dwelling units? I wanted to ask if we have a way. I hear anecdotally, and I hate to put out anecdotal data, but I hear all the time about people with their non-permitted ADUs, because they haven't been able to really legally build them for so long, but we know that so I'm just curious if we have a way to actually capture, aside from building permits, and I just didn't know. That was my note.
Not official, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, we hear that anecdotally too, and I think that, you know, what we're counting is building permits, which is the opposite, I guess, of what an unofficial accessory dwelling would be doing. They might be doing it without permits or getting a permit, but not saying it's for an accessory dwelling. And so we wouldn't have that logged as a dwelling. And that's what all of this is based on, is issued building permits.
That was it for me. Sue has a question. Go ahead, Sue.
I just want to comment that all illegal ADUs are simply resolved by complaints. So it's all a complaint-driven process. So the city does not have the staff or the motivation to go aggressively pursue that kind of thing. So it's complaint-driven, and you know, there are hundreds of them. I mean, around my house right here, there are several. So
I got chased down by somebody because I was taking a picture thinking, oh, look, a new ADU. And the guy actually chased me down and let me
yeah,
have
well, I mean, there's no such thing as being able to file permits on ADUs, I don't think, because there are so many of them that are not done with permits.
Alexis.
Yeah, and I wanted to just add, I think there's other sloppiness, for lack of a better word, of data in terms of, like, as housing gets more expensive, there's often times where two households will double up in the same single family home, and you can't track that as the city as well. So it kind of goes both ways, that you can have unaccounted for aspects like that.
A really good point. Yeah, and we know, I mean, and there's also, we've talked about things like CCNRs and things like that, that there's no way because the city doesn't enforce that, they don't actually capture that. So there's all kinds of things that we know are factors in this whole big picture, but we can't really factor it into this. So anyway.
I would make a joke about the report getting longer if we did, except where we can't, because we don't, like you said, we don't have a lot of that data. So, so efficiency measures. This chart seems like a good one. It's a good overview of how many net new dwellings we've seen that used efficiency measures versus that didn't or weren't in an efficiency measure area, like an area that was redesignated. The gray line, just as a reminder, is the average number of dwellings that used efficiency measures that we were forecasted to need to meet. And the black line is where we're at. So we're a little bit above that. Here, so this is pretty,
Your hand, John.
oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Oh, I was gonna let you finish, Heather.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was gonna move on to the next section because I didn't think there was a question, but
John's got it.
So, and this, I'll channel Phil Farrington on this one. So on the efficiency measure for accessory dwelling units, and the efficiency measure was basically SDU or the system development charge incentives. Do we know if any of those have been utilized? Because I know that the funds run dry. And so I just want to know, have any of those actually been utilized?
let me get there.
Thank you.
Right. And so So just as a reminder or a refresher on what the efficiency measure is, we knew we would see a certain amount of efficiency measure or ADUs. So here we go, the forecast. So I'm on the appendix, page 88. The forecast was that Eugene would see 168 ADUs during our planning period, or 8.4 ADUs per year without efficiency measures. And that would increase 50% to 12.6 per year with efficiency measures, being primarily the SDC credits. And so that would add 84 additional ADUs over 20 years. So not 84 total, but a net increase of 84 additional. And then this is where the math gets fun. So the land use code was amended a few times beginning in July 2018 to remove barriers to accessory dwellings. Since July 2018, let's see, ADUs, we saw 44 ADUs or 18.5 per year that have been permitted. That is 5.9 more on average per year, which is over the 2 years, it's a net increase of 12 ADUs since the efficiency measure. And we also amended the SDC code January 1 of 2019, so not far after that, where ADUs were provided 100% credit towards transportation system development charges at the time of the permit. 32 ADUs have received credits towards those permit charges. So since January 1, 2019.
Great.
All right. Okay, let's look back. So then, oh, sorry, does somebody have a question? No.
Well, just one more.
Yeah.
It's not a question. It's just, again, this will be, and I don't need you to dig into the appendix. But it seems to me that the major amount of the efficiency ones are going to be probably the land bank things. It's not going to be the changing of the zoning like we did. It's not going to be, it will be MUPTI. I think the two incentives that are probably going to drive these numbers into the looking good like we did well with the efficiencies is going to be the land banking for affordable housing and the MUPTI, which are, again, building the big buildings.
Right. So we have, we've seen about 150, a little over 150 of the affordable housing on land bank sites. And we had only at the time, because of how many sites we had in the bank, we were only estimating 55. So we're actually seeing more in that area. Redesignation or rezoning, was mostly redesignation, is slower because a lot of that is in the Crow Road area. A lot of those acres that were redesignated, and that area doesn't have all the utilities served to it yet to allow for annexation and subsequent development. So this isn't surprising. The other one I wanted to mention is the minimum density increase. So in the, oh, it's right here. So on medium density residential R2 land, we council increased the minimum density in the R2 zone from 10 to 13 dwellings per net acre. And we are actually seeing, we counted 304 net new dwellings on permits issued after that code amendment went into effect that had a net density above 10. And we actually think that that's going to increase over time because we're still seeing dwellings that are based on approvals that were before 2017, even when the code went into effect. So we do think that will increase over time, but already it's we've already met 65% of the forecasted need in MDR from that efficiency measure. So that's good. And then I will also channel Phil Farrington for a minute. So one of the questions he asked was, why are we coupling? He had questions about with the efficiency measures for downtown, how we're coupling some of the tools together. And so I just wanted to talk about that for a second. So this section of the appendix talks about the two different estimates that went for, that we did for understanding how many additional dwellings we could get downtown, generally downtown, with efficiency measures. So the first one was that we would see 943 additional dwellings incentivized through being either a MUPD project or being part of the student housing market. And that was in 2013. And the reason we put those two things together is in a number of cases, those actually overlapped, where it was a student housing project that got MUPD because it was the old version of MUPD before it was reformed. And we also were just trying to recognize what was thought at the time, that student housing was operating in its own market. And so it kind of incentivized itself. Like we were seeing redevelopment just because it was a student housing market that we weren't seeing at that time in other parts of the city. And so this 943 dwellings had actually already happened. They happened right after we ran the buildable lands inventory. And so that's why those seem odd coupled together, but it was kind of all part of the same market analysis that was happening. Because we didn't want to say that we needed 1,900, that we were short 1,900 homes that we needed to meet downtown, when we knew that 943 had already been issued after we ran the BLI. So we were basically trying to bring the net remaining need for multifamily housing up to date, even though we'd already run the BLI. And that was for council because the 1,000 units that we needed to incentivize downtown actually ended up being part of the conversation about revamping MUPD. And so we wanted to give them the most accurate information. So it's definitely a little bit awkward, and we struggled with how to write this section because it does feel a little bit weird to couple these two things, but that is actually how the analysis was done. We actually did a memo to council on both of these issues, and it was all put together. So that's why we've got 943 there. And then what everyone is more familiar with is that we need 1,000 more units downtown through a programmatic approach of MUPD, urban renewal, downtown program facilitation, staff liaison work, that sort of thing. So that was a question that Phil had, and hopefully he'll get to listen to this recording. Any concerns with that, or was that confusing for anyone else when they read this and feel like it could use some more explanation? Because I do think that this is another area that might be of particular interest because it's an investment program.
So the 943, that's basically capstone, right? Is what
It's a large part of it. It's a large part of it.
So I mean, I don't know if you want to put in parentheses, capstone was a large part of this, just so people know what that's about if you're trying to make it clear.
Yes, great, thank you. Okay. So we do pull that chart forward, which is the programmatic approach, and highlight more about the 1,000 units because I think that is what people are most familiar with. So I'm back in the report now out of the appendix. And we also highlight the R2 zone, raising the average density. So almost 63%. Oh, sorry.
No, I had a question that I wrote here, and when I reviewed this several weeks ago, I wrote this. So my question was, how many of those units would no longer qualify for the MUPD? Because we no longer allow it on student housing, correct?
Right. So that's the other that's why it's kind of broken out. And so maybe
Okay.
that's a way I need to say that, you know, this is MUPD, the version of MUPD that you could be student housing. And this is the new version of MUPD that you're not allowed to be student housing. And so I think we have that down here. The second chart shows dwellings that were from the combined downtown plan MUPD, but not also in student housing. And that's this chart that we brought forward. So we did try to keep those separate, but we'll make that clear. I don't know, maybe we'll talk to community development staff about how we labeled MUPD, you know, if there's like MUPD phase 1,
Right.
MUPD phase 2, or something like that.
Yeah, I think to me, it seemed like an important distinguishing factor when you're talking about essentially how effective have these measures been. And then, oh, by the way, we did away with one anyway, you know what I mean? I think it's relevant to point out that some of the units that were built, you know, because it was an effective tool, is actually no longer operates that way. So I just think that it seemed like relevant information. So
Yeah, and so we do say that, and so we could pull this forward, even though MUPD has been used less than anticipated since 2013. So only 177 dwellings have been used with MUPD since 2013. So since it was revamped. However, almost 63% of the 1,000 units that we need to get downtown have actually been met. They just didn't really use MUPD.
Yeah.
It has not been used as much. So we could pull that forward.
Yeah.
So I just want to do time check. We're at 7, and I know we're hoping to get to employment. So I'm just not seeing any additional questions on efficiency measures. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there and make sure that you all knew that I was recognizing that. This is all really good conversation though, so I'm not trying to speed us through, but just this is the last part of the housing section, housing development section. But it's a big one because we talk about the number of or the average density that we're seeing. And we're also talking about the number of acres that are developed. And so we did do the calculation for if you take out student housing, and I will have to forward you all that information. But if you take out student housing on commercial land and on high density residential, it drops significantly. So for commercial, I think it drops down to like 44 units per acre. If you take out potential student housing, and high density, I think it goes down to in the upper 20s. And so we've added that, and I'll follow up for sure and give you the exact numbers. I can't do it right now while I'm screen sharing, but I can follow up and I'll send an email and give you the exact numbers. But that was something that I think a couple of you flagged that we should try to pull that out. So we were able to pull that data out.
Quick question on that, Heather. In an UGB analysis, are you allowed to pull student housing out? So I think that needs to be flagged as well. Because if we're doing the UGB and, you know, if we're pulling it out and saying, we understand that all of these units are student housing, and we understand that because we're in our community, but we go and start doing a UGB analysis, our average density on commercial land is going to be way high, and those are the numbers that we're going to have to use. So I think there's got to be an asterisk in there somewhere that says, we know what this is, but going forward, we're legally going to be required to count these units as what they are, housing units.
Yep, and I think it'll be another, so I pulled out what the net density is for high density commercial, and then for 5+ units and 2 to 4 units. If you take student housing out, it all dropped. 2 to 4 units and high density residential didn't decrease as much as commercial, and 5+ units, those both decreased quite a bit. And then I also did it for developed land, because a lot of the potentially student housing oriented development was on developed land. It was redevelopment. And when we get to UGB analysis, we will have to look at our redevelopment assumptions. And so that will be a discussion topic, is no, we can't pull out student housing. But I think it is something to flag, and we've flagged it elsewhere in the report, that if the student housing market cools down, you know, how does that impact what we're planning for? Because it clearly has an impact on the results that we're seeing. But it's the same as with group quarters. If group quarters ramps up, that's another high density housing type. And so those land needs would go up. So, so it'll be, hopefully we'll have more data by the time we do this to enrich this conversation. Yeah, so you see the 82 and it drops to, I think, 39. This only 2 to 4 units only goes down a little bit. I think it goes to like 16. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, finally, sorry.
And so this is another point. The total amount of new dwellings were split almost evenly, with 41% being on developed land and 54% being on vacant and partially vacant combined. And that's a significantly higher percentage than we were planning for redevelopment, for the new housing on developed land.
And this may go kind of to what Tiffany's also talking about, is if House Bill 2001 happens the way that we hope it will, that's going to be on developed land as well.
Or partially vacant. Or vacant. So any additional comments on those sections? You know, we talked about this before. Housing has been coming in denser than what we planned or what we anticipated. And that has been, you know, density on smaller lots, regardless of slope, experienced the highest increase in density compared to the forecast. That seemed like an important note. I think in here we also talk about how, well, here we talk about the amount of the land supply that is annexed, to talk about the availability of land, like readily available land for development. But we also talk about how most of the housing has been on flat land. I think we must talk about that in the executive summary, but I know we specified that there has been more housing on flat land, significantly more housing on flat land than sloped land.
Claire, can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
Not exactly sure how I want to ask this. So I'm curious about that because you know, there's a different process, a land use application process if you're over 900 feet and you have to go through, because of the South Hills study, it can become very litigious, and that is different than if you are at the north end of Gillum and you want to put in a subdivision and nobody really cares. And so I guess that piece of it, it's sort of the elephant in the room. I mean, I'm in so many different conversations, and whether it's with developers or, you know, folks that do land use planning for clients for a living, or housing tools and strategies, this came up a lot. And it seems that those processes that exist within our community that create sort of a lot of barriers. I mean, we actually there was a study that was put out by the Oregon Law Center that actually quantified units of housing that our community was deprived of based on appeals, because they just never got built. They ran them out of money. It was a developer, and we're talking like huge PUDs at the top of the hills kind of things. And so I guess I just want to try to figure out if there's a way to weave in some of that actual factual information that, you know, because of course we're going to see more development on flat lands versus these up in the hills where it is much more contentious, and it has nothing to do with, it has to do with cost for sure. But when you ask people who do this for a living, they will tell you that the cost isn't because the excavation, the cost is because you have to add $1 million to the process, because you know you're going to be dragging it out for several years. And so I guess I just want to put that out there, because nowhere in any of this did it come up once yet. I'm pretty new to the community, and especially pretty new to all of these processes, but that's all anybody talks about is how things are so different in Eugene. And I've even asked developers that are developing in other communities that are from here, and they will say the same thing. It's like, we can't get anything built in Eugene, and it has nothing to do with, you know, the city's processes. So I guess I just want to flag that as something that seemed to be a common theme throughout here, but yet it's just like, it's glazed over. It's just not. And I didn't know if there was a tactful way to incorporate that actual data that I know exists. I mean,
yeah, I mean, we could certainly, that could be another like emerging issue recommendation, is to, I was just pulling up in the executive summary where we talk about how much of the land. So remember, when we're talking about slope, it's like flat or 5% or greater. So that's pretty big range. But there, you know, it's a significant part of our land supply and capacity on the rerun buildable lands inventory. So it's something that we could flag in the recommendations or emerging issues of, this is what we've seen. It's been predominantly development on flat land. And then we also know that as we rerun the draft inventory, a large portion of our supply is on sloped land. So consider, you know, what development, you know, look at the development restrictions and see if they're, if they should be explored or something like that. We're not off the top of my head how to say it, but it could certainly be something we put in the emerging issues.
John, go ahead, and then Lisa.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think jumped out to me, and this kind of goes to what Dennis brought up very early on in the meeting. One thing is that we see higher construction of housing on commercial zoned land. You know, it's there. It's the student housing, but it's also other housings. And, you know, if we see the impacts that he was referring to early on about the lack of people having to go into the office, there's going to be a lot of, this is my opinion, there's going to be a lot of empty, redevelopable commercial office space. And so I think that those will be the easiest ones to redevelop. Because if you've got a building that's sitting empty because you can't rent it as offices, and you can build housing units on it, the chances of a financial return are going to be better. The fact that there are successful new developments of multi-story high-end apartments. You know, you look at what was built on Pearl Street there, where the ballet partnered and put in high-end things. That was redevelopment on flat ground. And I think that it's going to, this is again my opinion, but I think that the flat ground, if it's got a building on it, is still going to be cheaper than trying to find flat ground that is undeveloped. And so I think that we're going to see more of that in the future. And I think it's going to pencil out. And I don't think that that's such a bad thing, because if we're building on already built spaces, one, if you're in commercial, you're not going to have the things that happen that Tiffany was referring to. If you meet your building codes and your design, you're not going to get appealed because it's a permitted use and it's allowed. So you can't appeal that. You know, there's little things that you can appeal. So I really think that this is one of the areas that is going to be the driving forces of housing in our community going forward.
I couldn't agree more with what John just said. I don't think it's a matter of litigiousness. That's not the emerging issue, I think is the term you used, Heather. The issue I see at hand is very much aligned with what John was saying, is how do we look at rezoning and repurposing property that has already had something on it. And I know that and sometimes when I've talked to whomever, whether it's a elected official or someone on the staff there about certain projects, the answer I get back is, oh, the zoning didn't allow us to XYZ. One example of that is when the bowling alley and Down to Earth burnt down on Willamette Street. The neighbors really wanted to see mixed use development, but we have a flat 1-story building there and missed the opportunity to add housing 2 or 3 stories because the staff said at the time that the way that the zoning is, the way the laws are, didn't really quickly allow for that opportunity to develop because there are certain things with fire and blah, 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 you know, but there are other ones, just like John was saying, where a commercial space could have been redeveloped for multi-uses and wasn't. So I hope that's the emerging issue we could look at. Thank you.
So with me, that said litigious. I just want to clarify the record. Heather did not use that term. It was me.
Oh, yeah, I think she used emerging issue. That was the emerging issue. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'll figure out what emerging issues, questions, things to study. It's the couch right now. We have issues sitting on the couch right now that we'll come back and show you where we think they fit in. Or we might just have a list of those things to look at further. So again, I think that this is another area. So average acres developed. We grouped medium, high density and commercial together. Hopefully that feels right to people. We did talk about how, you know, with commercial, for instance, we're seeing, you know, more development on developed land than we anticipated. But it's all kind of interrelated, right? Just like we were just talking about redevelopment, housing on commercially designated land surpassed all plan designations with a density of 78.6. You know, and again, it kind of goes back to redeveloping of commercial land saw a lot of housing, and it was high density, multi-story housing. We also hit a number of times, and maybe it's too much, but about the proximity of services to, for instance, the large portion of Crow Road that is split MDR and medium density residential and low density residential. It feels important to highlight because otherwise it feels like it is the lay of the land out there, and it feels like an important indicator to highlight. And then I don't know if you all had a chance to see this. We will have a link to this, but oh, actually, no, we won't. We haven't been able to do a link to this, but so we can try to figure out if this works for folks. I know it's not ideal because some of the dots overlap, but we had talked about, can we get kind of an understanding generally of where new housing is happening? And the multifamily red dots are so big that it's easy to not notice the single family detached, which are these little dots in here. We'll see if we can get better clarity on this. Maybe we need to break it into two parts, but I think if you look at it for a little bit, you can actually see that housing is happening all over the place. And again, particularly down in our commercial and HDR designated parts of the city, we're seeing a lot of multifamily. This doesn't have the designations on it. I just know that that's what the designations we're talking about in these areas. So any other feedback? Oh yeah, looks like we have some. Great.
Kevin, followed by Howard.
Heather, you've probably seen maps like that are tilted slightly and have three-dimensional like stacked bar graphs. So instead of just the size of the circle, the height of the item can indicate the quantity rather than it's the size of a circle. And I'll bet in your planning department, you've got one of those bits of software that can generate those maps. Just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know if we do. I will tell you that this was a test because we're hoping to do a community dashboard where we can put these charts online and people can download the data. And we also want to have interactive maps like this. So this was a test to try to see if we could do that or how we could do that in our new system. So you're right. We could definitely improve this. And I don't know if we'll be able to do that in time for publication of this, but we'll see what we can do. Thank you for the suggestion.
Howard, I think I had you next, and then I also have Sue in the queue. But you
Yeah,
guys.
thank you. Yeah, just a few comments. I've read through this and I think the data presentation is excellent. Certainly a deep dive into this whole area. For me, just looking at, the overall, it seems to me that somewhere at the beginning of the document, it needs to be clearly spelled out as to what the purposes of this document is. The discussion tonight's been very interesting and informative to me because don't have a lot of expertise or experience in housing, and so this was a very informative discussion for me. But it seemed like some of the discussion was, delving into a lot of policy options, and which is fine. But I thought the main purpose of this was to present, a plan and what the data have been and what needs to be looked at in the future so that policymakers can make corrections if some of the existing policies are not achieving goals as far as job creation or housing. And so it seems to me we need to be make it clear what this document is. And if we're proposing policy options, that's fine, but I didn't think that was the intent of this document.
Yeah, that's great. And we do have this yet to be written first page that is from a note from the planning director. And that's exactly what Alyssa was going to try to hit on, because we do go through that a little bit in the information that is way down here now because we moved the executive summary to the beginning, but like how to use a report, why it's important, those kinds of things. But I have been trying to flag for her some bullet points that could go up in this right in the beginning section. That would be helpful since all of that stuff is way lower in the report now.
I think it's very important that is set at the beginning of the document to set expectations and so the reader understands what this document is supposed to do. Otherwise you just kind of dive deep into a lot of data and information and perhaps lose sight of what this document is, what its purposes are.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I would just point you to page 9, which is recommendations. On page 9 is where those are being made. And I think, it's, that I think that's kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to, if there's recommendations being put out here, I think we need to have the full picture, because I know sometimes you have to peel back the onions a little bit or peel back the layers a bit. It's like an onion and go like, oh, well, this isn't happening because of, these underlying reasons. So anyway, I'm sorry, Sue and then John.
So I really appreciate Howard's comments. I was trying to figure out why I was getting increasingly uncomfortable here the last couple of minutes listening to the comments coming in. And I realized that this is to be the structure for how information is measured from here on. And our job is not to talk about policy or to ruminate about it. We all have our opinions. We have different opinions about it, and we all think we know what should be done. And that's good. And there's going to be a time for that in the future. But at this point, this is about creating a structure for measuring information so that we can make accurate and good, sensible policy decisions in the future. And I really, I hate to see us spend a lot of time talking about policy. That's not our job. We don't have the authority. But what we can do is really make sure that the structure is in place to measure the information so that then the policymakers can make good decisions. And I know from, the groups that we've been on, I've been on, and several others of us have been on in the past several years, it's really easy to get bogged down in policy. And I think it's important that we keep our focus and our task foremost in our minds so that we're getting the best information out that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I guess what I was hoping to I would love to hear from Jennifer and hear what she thinks as if we're heading in the right direction, because she sits on the council, and just to hear from her how she thinks her fellow counselors are going to receive this, and if she thinks we're heading in the right direction, because eventually it's going to her and her other counselors. So I'd love to hear from Jennifer.
Thanks, John. No, I really appreciated this conversation. I tend to stay quiet because the point is what you guys are doing. And I'm just kind of feel like my role is to kind of keep an eye on things and speak up if necessary. I think it's coming along very nicely. I mean, many of you have been around long enough to know that people look for what they want in a report sometimes. And I think there's a lot of intentionality of really sticking to the data in this report and being very clear about what it said. I have some of the same frustrations that Tiffany does, but that's probably more based on like what I want to see as policy at the end. And I understand what the staff has explained about the guardrails, I guess, that they have in using certain terms and how they do the charts, and that all makes very good sense to me. But I think this is coming along very nicely. I think it's a really good job. When we started this, I didn't think it would be this understandable and readable. So I don't know if that answers your question, John, but okay, good.
Okay, I don't have any other hands up. So thank you, Jennifer. Put you on the spot there, but I mean, after all, we are doing this for you. I'm kidding. But thank you. And
Yeah,
I'll just say, policy is my life. That's what I do for a living. And so it's hard to avoid the policy conversation in this, because at the end of the day, all of the data is intended to drive it. And so the data has to be informative and it has to tell the right story. And I think that that's why I'm really high centered on it, is like, we got to make sure that the data, that it all lines up and makes sense. And occasionally I see inconsistencies when we're seeing that, that two pieces of information don't tell the same story, or they tell the actual opposite story. And so I guess that's kind of where I'm like, it's a flag to me when I read it and see like, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily consistent with this other point. So anyway.
Yeah, and this isn't going to be the only piece of data that's going to inform policy decisions. We're going to do UGB. We're actually going to do actual analysis and research and comparisons when we get to the UGB analysis, and then there will be other forms of data we'll be able to use. So I just put employment development metrics on here. You all agreed to stay for another hour, right? Just kidding. Happy holidays. So I know everyone, I don't know about you all, but we kind of flagged that this was probably going to happen, that there's a lot to go through, and we're refreshing our memories, and building permit data we just talked about recently, and we still have a lot to say about it. So I just want to recognize that and appreciate the conversation, and appreciate your patience with us always trying to put those sideboards on. You probably get a little sick of us saying, yeah, later, UGB analysis, policy, not here. So thank you for your patience with that. I just wanted to really quick say, so we'll pick this up the first week in January 6th. With Ed's departure, we will be at 12, which is the minimum that we identified in the EETAC bylaws. So we are okay to continue until that gets resolved. there's no way we were going to do recruitment over the holidays. And then we have a series of vacations. And so I'll bring an update to you in January as far as what recruitment will look like and when it makes sense to go forward with that. But at this point, I just want to make sure everyone knows that we are still within our membership numbers.
Okay, great, thank you. It is 7:30 and as Heather mentioned, we didn't get to employment development metrics, so we will pick that up where we left off. So I will wish everybody a happy holidays, and I love to say, I'll see you next year. So I think with that, unless there's anything else, I can go ahead and adjourn our meeting.
Bye, Ed.
Thanks,
Bye, Ed.
everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes, and we'll
Bye,
see you
everyone.
next year. All right, bye.